Hello and welcome to episode 135. My name is Joy Ravella, the host of the Everyday Joy podcast. If you love listening and if you haven't yet left a 5-star written review, would love for you to do that. Today we are going to unpack a verse found in Matthew. Let's get into it.
Jesus said, "Give a cool cup of water to someone who is thirsty. The smallest act of giving or receiving makes you a true apprentice. You won't lose out on a thing." That's Matthew 10, verse 42 from the Message translation.
I have got George here with me, not in studio, but you are in another studio over in Auckland, New Zealand. So good to have you on the show, George.
Well, thank you, Joy. Look at this modern technology, eh?
I know.
What will they think of next?
Oh, it's incredible. Something else that I'm really looking forward to is the next 3 verses that we're looking at. It's a little bit of a teaser on the Everyday Joy podcast. They all, in a way, line up. We're building a pyramid, or we're building something, really. We're doing the foundation today. We've got more structure coming in tomorrow. And on Thursday's episode, George, you've got a really great story to share that weaves all of those ideas together. So I'm really, really looking forward to today's one. So, George, what are your first impressions of today's verse?
Well, I'm thinking about the significance of a cool cup of water, which I think it's easy for us to miss, in places like Australia, where you are, or New Zealand, where I am, because we tend to have plenty of water to drink, right? Whenever we want it. And so we might be like, oh, a cup of water. Couldn't I have something a bit more exciting? Milkshake or can of energy drink, something like that. And I don't mean to be silly, but, seriously, I think we miss what a cup of cool water would mean in the place Jesus was saying those words originally. I have been to the Middle East in the hottest part of the year, and let me tell you, my goodness, cup of cool water would be very welcome.
Yeah, my goodness, that's so true, because not that I've been to the Middle East, but I've been to India in the summer. And my goodness, all you want is water, and there's like a sweetness to it. Like when you're so dehydrated, and you have that cool glass of water. When someone says to you, "Would you like some water?" I actually remember very, very clearly now as you share this, George. We were traveling to one of the villages where my uncles had established a church. Now in this village, they had no electricity. They were still setting up, and so we were walking through these dusty streets, and it was hot. My goodness, you could feel the heat radiating off you. I was just drenched. And we get to the doors of this church, and they were expecting us, and they had one tiny little fridge. This was the only one, I think, in the 10-house radius. And inside the fridge, there were these packs of water bottles that they had pre-purchased for us, because they knew that we, wouldn't drink water from the tap. And so we arrived there, and they said, "Would you like some water?" And I literally remember feeling like I could cry with happiness. It was the most thoughtful, beautiful gift. And I think it does help with understanding the context. Here in Australia, a cool cup of water is a little bit like, well, what about coffee, But, that really helps to understand that. So what does this verse, George, tell you about who God is or what matters to him?
I think it tells me that God works through people, which is actually pretty amazing, because, if he is God, he can do anything, right? If he's God, then it's going to be within his power, for example, to give someone a cup of water. But the thing is, he uses human beings to do this stuff. He uses us to help other people. And so for me, I guess this verse is a reminder of that truth, the truth that our actions can be used by God. The stuff we actually do can in some way reflect him. And this verse says, the smallest act of giving or receiving makes you a true apprentice. An apprentice, a student, a disciple of the master. So we actually reflect who we follow in some way by these actions. To me, that's a pretty mind-blowing idea.
Yeah, and I think what also catches me is the last bit of that verse, which says you won't lose out on a thing. It's almost like God knows how our brains work. I think one of the first things, well, at least for me, is when I think of the idea around giving to someone, giving a cool cup of water to someone who is thirsty, or financially giving, or giving of my time or resources, my first thought is, okay, what is exiting my life? Like, what am I giving up? What am I having to sacrifice? And I love how the last few words of this verse actually say, you won't lose out on a thing. What are your thoughts on why that was added at the end of that verse, or how it comes to play in and around the other words said in this verse?
That's an interesting question. I think if we think about what Jesus is actually saying here, who he's talking to, it comes from what we call the missionary discourse. So it's Jesus sending the disciples out on mission. He's summoning them. He's giving them authority to work on his behalf. And it's probably worth saying that, it says, give a cool cup of water to someone who is thirsty. But technically, it's actually about giving a cup of water to a disciple, to a follower of Jesus. That's the person you're giving the water to that he's specifically talking about here. So I guess, just thinking here, I guess that he's saying, if you are doing this work on my behalf, and if people are receiving you in my name, that brings perspective to everything that you do. So you're supporting them, you're supporting me, he's saying.
So good, George. I guess there's, as is the case, so many layers to every single word of God, and I love this. How has this verse come alive in your life?
Well, to be honest, in a way, it hasn't, because I've never been on the receiving end of this sort of thing. And to be honest, I haven't given in that way either. And even if I had, I probably shouldn't say that I had. I can't be like, well, there was this time, Joy, where I gave a cup of cool water to someone who was thirsty. I was a really good disciple. But as you ask that question, how it plays out in my life, I think what I'm going to say is that other people serving in this way acts as a real inspiration to me. And specifically, I've got in mind Mother Teresa. I am just struck by the way that she did this sort of thing so selflessly and so amazingly for such a long time, for so many years. She served people who others wouldn't go near, who others wouldn't touch. And she literally did the sort of thing that we're talking about in today's verse. Mother Teresa would give a cup of cool water to someone who was thirsty, right? And if we go back to that idea we're talking about, that these sort of actions can somehow reflect something of God himself, I think if we look at someone like Mother Teresa, we actually really see that happening. There's a lot we could say about her incredible life, but I just want to quickly mention this quote of hers that I love. Because she once said that she was a little pencil in the hand of a writing God who was sending a love letter to the world. So I think that really sums it up well. You asked me how this verse plays out in my life. In a way, I can't say that it has, but I can also say that I'm really inspired by the lives of people like Mother Teresa, who have so clearly done this stuff, and their examples inspire me. They inspire us in whatever context we find ourselves in to try and act in a way that reflects God.
If I'm honest, there's an aspect to this verse that just makes me ponder. I feel like it's a mystery, it's a responsibility. It's also such an honor that God invites us to be the hands and feet of Jesus. That when someone prays to God for a breakthrough, God stirs our hearts to be that answer to prayer. That God invites us into that process. And George touched on that earlier, that when we give that cool cup of water to someone, God is inviting us to be a part of his provision. God is inviting us to be that answer to prayer. The other thing I want to touch on is the fact that the context matters around this verse. It matters with every verse. And George shared something that I didn't consider at all. And it's the fact that this verse is written to and intended for a group of people who were sent out by Jesus. And so they were doing the Lord's work. And I want to take a moment to acknowledge the fact that you could be listening right now and you are involved in ministry in some way. Maybe you're a pastor yourself. Maybe you lead some kind of Christian organization and you are right there on the front lines, ensuring that more and more people can discover the love of Jesus in some way. And maybe you're listening and you aren't part of that frontline sort of ministry outreach work, but you have the opportunity to provide that cool cup of water to those who really do put themselves on the line. One of the things I saw my dad do many times was that whenever we had a guest speaker within our Indian community, Dad would always go out of his way to either invite them over to our house for a meal, and both my mum and my dad would just put on an absolute feast for them. Or Dad would offer them a place to stay, or Dad would step up, and he'd be embarrassed if I shared this because he keeps it very private, but Dad would always provide them some sort of financial gift. I actually have so many memories of Dad saying, "Quick, Joy, go find a blank envelope," and me running around the house trying to find one that didn't have a name or a stain on it. And we would head to an ATM on the way to the event, and Dad would, slip some money into that envelope and he would pass it on. And I grew up watching this, wondering why. I mean, these individuals have chosen to live this life. Why do we have to open up our home? Why do we have to go so far to do this? But reading this verse, it reminds me again of the incredible privilege that we have as a Christian community, as a community of believers, to support those on the front lines. So maybe for you, today could be the day you decide to do something for your pastor. Or this is the day that you do something for that ministry that you support. It could be practical, like opening up your home, dropping off a meal. Maybe it could be making a donation. Maybe for you, it could be intentionally praying and asking God, how can I refresh these individuals or this organization that is going out and spreading your word? So before I wrap up today's episode, I also wanted to read something out to those of you listening who are on the front line and you need that cool cup of water, you need that refreshment. And I want to read to you a poem that was posted on our Everyday Joy Facebook community, written by the lovely Denise. She wrote this poem herself, and I wanted to share it with you on behalf of this community, like a cool cup of water, to refresh you and remind you that you are loved. So this is Denise's poem that she wrote a few years back. God knows me, I claim, 'cause he knows me by name. He knows my dimples and freckles and toes. He knows the length of my arm, the width of my palm, my eyes, my ears, and my nose. And I've heard it said he knows the hairs on my head in numbers too many to count. He knows its texture and strength, its curls and its length, even the ones that have now fallen out. And he'll count them each day as they slowly turn grey, well before that I think that it's time. But my delight has to be that God cares about me, and he calls me his dear child of mine. That beautiful poem written by Denise McKenzie, and if you want to see it, it's posted on the Everyday Joy Facebook group, and the link to that is below. I hope those words were like a cool cup of water for you listening, and for the rest of us, that we would step up, that we would live out today's verse and know that we are invited into God's arms of generosity, that we get to be part of the equation. We get to be part of the process of answering someone else's prayer and being their refreshment. Such an opportunity that we have. Hey, I'm looking forward to tomorrow's episode. George is going to be back. I look forward to catching up then.